You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we've got some breaking news here. Donald Trump has informed the Justice Department that he intends to sue them over the execution of the Mar-a-Lago search warrant. Does he actually have a case here?
The answer is no. I could say that I intended to win a gold medal at the Paris Olympics in the 100-meter dash. Donald Trump's saying he intends to sue the Department of Justice, the federal government, for, and here are some of his claims in the notice that his lawyer has given. An illegal search warrant at Mar-a-Lago. It was a lawless indictment handed down against me. It was a malicious prosecution. Essentially, he's asserting that the whole thing was a witch hunt. So he's going to sue the Department of Justice. That is pure and utter nonsense. Here's probably the most interesting thing for our viewers to know, Brian. Once the federal government receives notice that somebody's going to try to sue them, under the prevailing law, which is called the Federal Tort Claims Act, it's a law that's been around since, I think, 1946. The federal government has 6 months to just respond to the notice that a person files saying, hey, DOJ, hey, federal government, I'm going to sue you. So do we really think Donald Trump is going to follow through on this? Do we really think 6 months from now, after Donald Trump loses the presidential election badly, he's really going to bring suit against the federal government for claims that are unsupportable and contradicted by all available evidence? Or do we think he's doing it for public relations purposes?
Right. Now, the execution of the search warrant itself was so cut and dry. I mean, the guy stole classified documents in clear, direct violation of the Presidential Records Act. The government gave him ample notice to return them. He refused every single time. They issued a subpoena. He refused to comply. A federal magistrate judge approved a search warrant. It was properly executed. Donald Trump was even warned, and they knew that Donald Trump wouldn't be there that day. If this thing is actually filed in opposition to everybody's better judgment, would you consider this frivolous? And could his lawyers actually be opening themselves up to sanctions by virtue of moving forward with it?
Yeah, frivolous is probably the nicest thing you could call a lawsuit like this that has no basis in law or in fact. It really does feel like these Trump lawyers, these lawyers who, for whatever reason, gravitate toward Donald Trump and do his ugly, dirty, and nefarious bidding in court, are forever playing a game of who wants to be disbarred, because lawyer after lawyer has literally either been disbarred or sanctioned by courts, sometimes to the tune of $1 million, for bringing these baseless lawsuits. Now, this lawyer, according to the reporting, is a guy named Daniel Z. Epstein, who is part of something called the America First Legal Group, a group founded by whom? Stephen Miller, not a lawyer. So what could possibly go wrong? But, frivolous, again, is probably the nicest thing you could say about a lawsuit like this. But let's drill down a little bit on the Federal Tort Claims Act, because I think it's interesting to explain why there is absolutely no basis for a lawsuit like this. First of all, the people who work in the federal government, I was one of them for more than 30 years, actually have a healthy dose of what's called sovereign immunity. In other words, if I'm doing my work day in and day out as a federal prosecutor, investigating cases in the grand jury, asking the grand jury to indict defendants if the evidence supports an indictment, going into court and trying the cases, appearing on behalf of the government in sentencing hearings. If I'm doing that work and it is within the scope of my official duties as a federal prosecutor, guess what? I can't be sued because somebody is unhappy with the way I went about my work, with the decisions I made. In fact, Brian, I virtually made somebody unhappy with every prosecutorial decision I made. Either I was going to make the defendant and his loyalists and his family members unhappy, or I might make the victim and the victim's family and the community unhappy when I'm exercising my prosecutorial discretion. But think about it. If they could rush into court and sue me all day, every day, federal government employees and officers would do nothing but spend their days in court. They wouldn't be doing the work of the American people. That is why federal government employees and officers have a healthy dose of protection against being sued, as long as we're acting within the scope of our duties. Okay, let's apply that to this ridiculous claim Donald Trump is now making. You mentioned it a minute ago. He's attacking the warrant, the search warrant that was executed by the FBI at Mar-a-Lago that found all of these classified documents that Donald Trump was illegally not only hoarding, but hiding from the government, because the government over and over and over, including with a subpoena, demanded the return of those documents because they belong to the federal government, not to Donald Trump. So that search warrant was approved by a federal judge after the FBI presented the federal judge with all of the evidence in a sworn affidavit supporting their request for that search warrant. That search warrant is bulletproof. It is lawful, not lawless, as Donald Trump suggested, but it gets even worse. Because some of what Donald Trump's lawyer put in this notice that I'm going to sue the Department of Justice is as follows. He said, well, the Department of Justice violated well-established protocols because Trump said that the FBI could have the documents anytime they wanted it. And you know what they use as authority for that? A Trump post saying, and I quote, all the FBI had to do was ask for the documents. I mean, this is why it kind of goes to the core of your question. Is this, would this be a frivolous lawsuit? And could lawyers who filed it be sanctioned or worse, investigated for possible disbarment? It sure looks that way.
Well, there would certainly be precedent for that within the ranks of Donald Trump's previous lawyers. Just a quick note, just to step aside for a quick moment for our Legal Breakdown viewers. I have a book coming out this week. It's called Shameless. This is the result of months and months of work. So this series will always be free. We'll never put our content behind a paywall. But if you're looking for a way to support what I do, please consider ordering the book. I'll put the link right here on the screen, and it's also in the post description of this video. Very proud of the way it turned out. The foreword is written by Jamie Raskin, and I think you'll leave having learned a lot after digging into it. So again, it's called Shameless, and very much appreciate if people watching could grab a copy if they haven't yet done so. Glenn, you had mentioned something that piqued my interest before, and that is the idea that this is all just for PR. Is this basically so that Donald Trump can just point to some baseless lawsuit that, of course, will go nowhere if he even opts to file it in the end, but will give him grounds to frame this as the DOJ being in the wrong, despite the fact that, for all the reasons you just mentioned, they clearly weren't?
Oh, Donald Trump, I'm sure, will begin spouting this off at his hate rallies. Of course, he's only holding a campaign rally every week or every other week. I mean, it's not like there's a presidential election coming up.
It's interesting you point to that because it really is circular logic at its best. Basically, he claims that he's going to file a lawsuit and then points to the lawsuit that he's going to claim as justification that somehow he was in the right because now there's litigation pending.
You're exactly right. I was going to say at these rallies, I'm sure you're going to hear him say, I've sued the FBI for a malicious prosecution against me in the classified documents case. So to somebody who doesn't care to pay attention to the facts or engage in critical thinking, maybe they'll leap to the conclusion that, oh, he's filing a suit, therefore he has a legitimate claim, evidence to back it, and he's going to win. Most thinking people will say, you filed a claim, but you filed lots of other lawsuits that were not only frivolous and without evidence and without legal support, but, for example, in the election interference arena, all 60 or 65 cases were thrown out of court and really more accurately laughed out of court by judges. So why should we believe that just because you filed a lawsuit, you've got any evidence to back it up or it's going to be successful? But this will be yet another fundraising cry to his supporters saying, hey, I filed this lawsuit so I could really use another one of your precious dollars, $5, $10. Why don't you just go ahead and send it to me?
Right. Meanwhile, you've got Alina Habba walking around with $70,000 Birkin bags, but, I guess they don't want to talk about that part. Glenn, did the fact that Judge Canon dismissed this case down in Florida give Donald Trump something of a predicate to be able to do this? Basically, the fact that she dismissed the case on some bogus grounds of the constitutionality of special counsels, that would give the impression that the whole thing was unfounded, and so Donald Trump would basically take that and run, take it and pretend that the whole thing was just some witch hunt against the perpetual victim here, Donald J. Trump.
Brian, the answer to that question is no. Donald Trump gets no support in a lawsuit that I'm not convinced he will ever file just because Judge Canon dismissed the case because she didn't think the special counsel was lawfully or constitutionally appointed. First of all, she's wrong about that. Every other judge, every other court who has had to decide the issue, said, of course, special counsel is a lawful and constitutional procedure. It's been used in one form or another in the United States since the 1800s. Of course, Judge Canon did an enormous favor that had no support in the law to Donald Trump. But that will give him absolutely no argument that, the prosecution that was brought by special counsel Jack Smith based on the evidence and the law was somehow malicious, was without any support in the evidence or the law. Why? Because if this suit was brought and if it was litigated, all of the evidence would be laid out supporting the indictment, supporting the commencement of a prosecution against Donald Trump. So, atmospherically, maybe it's kind of a specious argument. It might look good on the surface because Judge Canon threw the case out, but it offers no support for any lawsuit Donald Trump might file in the future.
Yeah, per usual, you look 1 inch beneath the surface and you get the reality that what Donald Trump is doing is just perpetuating a sham. With that said, we will stay on top of this. If Donald Trump ever deigns to file this lawsuit, which again, likely is not going to happen. This is just another PR stunt for him to squeeze some more money out of his supporters. But if we see movement, we'll of course cover it. For those watching right now, if you want to follow along with all of the legal news that's happening right now, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on the screen. Glenn is fast approaching 1 million, so for the entire Legal Breakdown community out there, if you want to support the work that Glenn does, please make sure to subscribe to his channel, and of course I'll put the link to my book on the screen as well. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching the Legal Breakdown.